Yeah, I'll just talk today about PED, kind of how it affects the farm, what you can expect to see, maybe some points on what you should do to control it, things like that, and then how we can prevent it, looking really at biosecurity. And so these experiences, or this information comes out of my experiences really on the ground seeing PED in some of our managed farms at AMVC, as well as some of the research that I've done with done through Iowa State, so kind of looking at it from both sides. So just as a little background, PEDv is a coronavirus. So for those of you that have been in the pork industry for a while, you've been around and been raising pigs for a number of years, it's really similar to TGE virus. They come from the same family, very similar characteristics, and they have very similar effects on pigs. This is an envelope virus, which is really important when you think about how you're going to kill it and how you're going to stop it from moving around your farm and on your trailers and things like that. It survives best in cool, moist environments, which is good news since we're moving into the summer. Affects pigs of all ages, and it's spread through manure when pigs ingest manure. What it does is when it infects pigs, it's going to infect the cells within the intestine, the enterocytes, destroy those, cause villus blunting, and then this is going to cause the animal to be unable to absorb nutrients and fluids from the gut, which is going to cause a malabsorptive diarrhea, and also result in an osmotic diarrhea. So the pigs are kind of getting hit with a 1-2 punch, really causing then a diffuse watery diarrhea. So grossly, this is what it looks like. Not too fascinating. Pretty normal pig here, and the only real thing you see is some thin-walled intestines. So as I mentioned, this is what it's going to cause, and this will result in diarrhea of pigs of all ages. So clinically, looking at live pigs, it just looks, similar to this. You'll have a pig alive, normal in all ways, except very watery, diffuse diarrhea. The type of diarrhea that you will notice in the farrowing crates or in your finishing barn, streaks going down the side of the pens because it is that watery. So pretty striking and easy to recognize. PED is not a new or emerging disease, although it's new to us and it's been getting a lot of excitement here in the U.S. recently. So it was identified in Europe back in the 70s and pretty much spread through most European countries. In Asia and China, it was identified in the 80s and has become really important in the 2000s, and from 2010 on, they've really been struggling with it quite a bit over there. And then now we're just getting used to it over here in the USA with introduction in 2013. So it's most closely related to virus isolates from China, and it has some genetic features that are similar to some bat coronaviruses, which, and following that first introduction of the first PED strain, we had a second introduction. So the first strain was identified in the spring of 2013, and then in January 2014 we identified a second strain of PED. So whatever the method of its introduction is, it was still occurring, and so this strain is only 93 to 94.5% similar to the other strain. So there are a couple different PED isolates circulating around the U.S. now. So it's unknown at this point how it got in. Some people are speculating feed. Some folks are going to speculate supplies, people, maybe a combination. The truth is we really don't know how it got here in the first place, and it's probably too far gone now that we're never going to be able to figure that out exactly. However, the short time frame of multiple diagnoses on sow farms across the United States, these would be farms that are separated by thousands of miles, have nothing really in common at all, but they would become positive in very short order, suggests that the virus was probably circulating in the USA for a while before it was actually identified. And actually, when they go back and look at banked samples from other cases, they were able to identify it a month or two earlier in pigs from Ohio. So we don't really know how long it was circulating before it showed up on sow farms. And while we don't really know how it got here, we do have a pretty good idea of how it's moving around now. So the rapid spread of PEDv is probably most closely related to contaminated livestock trailers going up and down the roads. So if you think about livestock trailers that are hauling fat hogs to terminal markets, oftentimes they're not going to wash or disinfect or bake or anything like that simply because they don't have time. They don't have time to bake. They don't have enough trailers, so maybe there aren't enough drivers. So what they've got to do is pick up the pigs, drop them off at the terminal market, go back and grab the next load of pigs, right? And what's been demonstrated is that for every one contaminated livestock trailer that enters a packing plant, you're going to have 2 leaving. So if you're not washing and disinfecting, you can see where you'll spread this virus around pretty quickly across the United States. Luckily, we do have a number of tests available now to identify it rapidly and then differentiate between the 2 strains. So we've got a number of PCRs available to identify the virus. We've got some serology tests available, so we can identify if pigs have been exposed, even if they're not sick now. We can identify, have our pigs seen this virus in the past? We've also got some specialized tests, including electron microscopy and virus isolation and sequencing. And the sequencing becomes really important as you try to determine which strain of PED you have now. One seems to be more pathogenic than the other, and if that's important to you to understand which one you have, the sequencing can be a great aid. So I'll change gears a little bit and talk a little bit briefly about how it affects sow farms and how it affects grow-finished pigs. So in a sow farm, your sows are going to get infected and expose piglets to large amounts of virus. So sows in gestation, when they have their litters and they're farrowing out, they're going to be shedding virus and they're going to infect their piglets. In the United States, essentially all of our sows, not anymore, but at the time, were naive to PEDv. So when the virus came in, it hit them hard and it spread very quickly. And what it did is it caused a severe diarrhea in these sows. Again, since they were naive to the virus, they had no way to protect their piglets. When we look at other viruses like TGE, rotavirus, other things that are going to cause diarrhea, we've got some protection in our herds, so we don't get hit quite as hard. When it came to PED, we're absolutely naive. The sows can't protect the piglets, and that's part of why our losses were so severe. The effect on piglets is exactly the same as it is in sows. The difference is piglets are so small, only a few pounds, that when they get this severe watery diarrhea, they just get dehydrated very quickly, and they lose condition, and they die in a matter of a day or 2. So to kind of put it in context of at the farm level now, if your farm becomes infected with PED, you can expect mortality to be essentially 100% for 3 to 5 weeks at a minimum, and realistically probably 5+ weeks. And then beyond that, you can expect increased mortality and decreased quality of pigs for a few more weeks as you start to build immunity in the herd. And then if everything's done correctly, you'll sort of return to pretty close to normal production. So what I'll kind of point out here, and actually it may be easier to just do with the mouse arrow. So these are farms. The blue farms are just an average of all farms that I work with, and the red farms will be one farm in particular. And what you see is this is normal production, ticking along, normal wean pigs. So 1 means 100% normal production. And then at this point, they become infected with PEDv. We weaned pigs off, so that's why you see a big spike in the number of pigs weaned. But then you have this period of time where it's 5+ weeks where you're going to have no pigs weaned. And then recovery is going to be variable, but if you do everything right, in 5+ weeks, you can see you'll have a couple weeks here of decreased production, but then you can really get back up to normal production pretty quickly if you follow proper sanitation procedures and have good immunity in your herd. And then one other caveat to point out, this is a disease that causes diarrhea, and we forget about some of the other production effects of this, but you've got 5 weeks of sows farrowing all at once and not lactating piglets. And what that's going to do is that's really going to mess up your returns to estrus and your breed groups. So 16 to 20 weeks later, you're going to see another big drop-off in production as your breed groups are messed up and you have small breed groups. And then 16 to 20 weeks later, you'll see that little blip again, and then from that point, it should hopefully smooth out as you get your breed groups straightened out. In finishing barns, PED is going to cause the exact same severe diarrhea that it's causing in our adult animals, that it's causing in our piglets. But the diarrhea is self-limiting. These pigs are bigger. They can recover faster. So if you support them, they'll do great. By support, you got to give them regular access to water, gruel and mat feed them, get them up several times a day. These pigs will feel bad, and they'll just lay around and mope, kind of like a sick kid. They won't get up and eat, and they'll fall backwards unless you get them up and get them to drink and eat. Then they'll do great. Provide plenty of supplemental heat for these pigs, and then plus or minus antibiotic therapy as your veterinarian deems necessary because we will see a lot of secondary bacterial infections, a lot of E. coli and things like that following PED. So you may need to treat them for that as well. However, if you do these things right, mortality is usually going to be very low in weaned to finished pigs, probably 3% max on your very youngest animals and 1% or less on any animals that have been placed really for any point in time and really already started on feed. They will, however, lose weight. They'll grow slower, and you'll probably see 2 to 3 weeks additional time to get them up to market weight. And then remember that these animals are a huge risk to your other farms during that time that they're shedding virus. They're going to be shedding huge amounts of virus, and that will be very easily tracked across the countryside. If you're working both with finishers and sow farms, you could very easily move it from your finishing barn into your sow farm. So just because this doesn't cause great losses in grow finish doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of risk to your system or to your farm. So these numbers that I've talked about so far assume rapid, successful control of an outbreak. You did everything right, you exposed the animals right, and you cleaned up really well. Proper steps must be taken in order to achieve this. You've really got to clean up your environment, and you can't get it clean enough. Clean, clean, clean. You're going to have 5 weeks where you don't have any piglets to take care of, so spend that time cleaning the farm to decrease the amount of PED that's left when you start trying to wean pigs again. And then you've got to get protection to the piglets through the sow's milk. So this is a real similar graph to the one I just showed you, but here we look at, again, our system average and then a farm that didn't do quite so well. So if I can find my cursor here. Here you see the same loss, upfront loss in weaned pigs. And as they start to recover, they never quite get up to 100%. They look like they're doing pretty good, and then they drop off again. Start to do pretty good, and then they drop off again, and then they drop off a lot, and then they do better, and then they drop off again. And it just sort of goes like that for a long time. And there's a lot of reasons that may result in this. It might be difficult barn layout that makes internal biosecurity really difficult. Maybe it's hard to separate farrowing from gestation movements. Communication breakdowns can be really critical in this as well. If you don't have all of your employees, if not all the farm caretakers are on the same page about absolutely what all the best practices are, what everyone needs to be doing, any small slip up can result in this failure to return to normal production. In this case, it was caretakers that thought they were doing the right thing by saving piglets that were accidentally farrowed out in gestation, try to get them up into farrowing and get them warm, something that we would always want to do to take care of the piglets. But what they're doing is they're bringing contaminated piglets into the farrowing room and putting the rest of those pigs at risk. So they just keep fueling that fire. So to do this, once PED is diagnosed, it's important to do immediate feedback of the whole herd with scours material. So feedback should be obtained from acutely infected piglets. You want to expose the whole herd and get every animal sick and over the disease at the exact same time so that we've got good protection in the whole herd. And then you can expect, if you do this properly, lactogenic protection approximately 3+ weeks following good feedback. I say lactogenic. That's different than what we think about colostrum. This isn't getting pigs one good shot of colostrum and then they're protected like some diseases. It's got to be constant supply of good milk. During that time, the entire sow farm needs to be cleaned and disinfected. You need to focus especially on your farrowing rooms. You should wash sows before you put them into the farrowing rooms when you're loading them. Wash and disinfect hallways every time an animal's moved so that we can get any fecal material that accumulates in the hallway out of there so that employees aren't tracking it into the farrowing rooms. Stop movements, all movements between litters so that we're not mixing infected pigs with uninfected pigs. And process piglets at 24 hours of age. The reason we suggest processing at 24 hours of age is shedding in an affected pig is going to happen 24 to 36 hours after they ingest the virus. If you can process those pigs at 24 hours of age, you can handle them before they're shedding in virus, and you can really minimize a lot of the risk for moving the virus around. So we suggest processing at 24 hours of age. Even if you do all these things right, animals are going to continue to shed virus for an extended period of time. This means that after everything looks good and is back to normal, there's still virus there and you're not out of the woods. And if you get lax on any of your biosecurity protocols, you're going to re-break. So to give sow and piglet immunity the best chance to be successful, we must minimize their challenge from the environment. We've got to keep everything clean, and we've got to follow these guidelines to a T. I like to tell people disease, there's no such thing as 100% protection or 100% disease. It's a balance. So there are things that are going to make pigs more likely to be challenged. Maybe a dirty environment, a naive population, poor power washing, poor disinfection, bad movement of animals between litters so that you're moving virus around. Those are going to put more animals at risk. And on the other side, you've got the animal protecting itself, the immunity. So things like getting good exposure to your sows, making sure your sows are milking well and your piglets are drinking. You can add vaccines to that as well. They can help boost immunity. You've got to have both of those perfect to get good protection. If you drop off on one or the other, you will have disease. So you really have to do everything 100%. You can kind of think of it as bailing out a boat. It doesn't matter how good your protection is or how big your bucket is. If that leak's big enough, the boat's still going to sink. So you got to keep that hole small and get a big bucket. So again, excellent biosecurity is critical to preventing PED from entering your sow farm. And excellent internal biosecurity is going to be critical to shut down breaks and to keep it from coming back. So minimize unnecessary visitors. Do all those things that we're already doing to keep other diseases out, but do them better. Do them all the time. A big one that I like to do is washing and disinfecting boots when entering risky areas. That might be when you go out to your isolation barn or you're removing dead. Yeah, we might change our boots, and we've got dedicated boots to those areas, but those boots could still become contaminated, and they're still sitting in the entryway. So let's just go ahead and disinfect them. Internal biosecurity. Again, wash our sows, stop piglet movements, disinfect all equipment that you have to use on multiple animals, and if there's a piece of equipment you don't need, get rid of it. A perfect example would be processing carts. You don't have to catch an entire litter and put it in a cart. That cart could be contaminated and spread disease to the next litter. You can catch those pigs one at a time, process them, and put them down in the crate. It may take a little bit longer, but it will increase your biosecurity dramatically. So I mentioned the boot washes. What we like to do is use a foamer, put your choice of disinfectant in there, and after you wash off your boots, foam them down. This is better than a boot wash because it doesn't get dirty. The disinfectant stays in there and doesn't become contaminated or inactivated. And then you can tell if you've done a good job disinfecting your boots or not because they're white and foamy, and if they're not, you didn't do it right. So you got to pick the right foamer. Some of the cheap garden sprayers, while they're easy to get and they're affordable, they really don't work very well. So preventing a PED outbreak, we need to make sure that all livestock trailers are washed, disinfected, and baked between every load of animals. If you're going to have the presence of feces on your trailer, then you've got to heat the trailers to 160 degrees Fahrenheit to inactivate the virus. And you should always assume there's going to be feces on that trailer no matter how good of a job you did washing. When a trailer arrives at your farm, inspect it to make sure it's clean. Even though they said they washed it, you should empower all of your employees to look at that trailer, and if they're not comfortable with it, give them the power to tell that trailer to turn around and go rewash. That will save you a lot of trouble down the road. So what do we know specifically about trailer sanitation, disinfectants, heat, those things when it comes to PED? There's not a whole lot out there yet, but we're learning more all the time. We can, however, go back and look at some other viruses that are real similar to PED. There's a lot of information out there regarding them when it comes to disinfectants, and we can use that information to learn some things about PED. So a good disinfection or a good sanitation process, apart from washing, is going to use proper disinfection, so proper disinfectant choice, proper concentration, proper contact time, and doing it in the proper environment. And then it's going to include a heat step as well, and the parameters of that heating. How hot do you need to get for how long is also very important. So if we look at some of the disinfectants that we commonly use, Viricid, Synergize are real common in a lot of our livestock trailers and a lot of our swine facilities, and those contain gluteraldehyde and Quaternary Ammoniums. So just looking at gluteraldehyde and Quaternary Ammoniums, we see that 5 minutes at 2% can decrease TGE infectivity significantly. So that's good news for PED. However, this is a lot higher concentration than we usually use on our farms. It's probably 10 times higher than what we actually usually use. And then a really important point here, increased contact time and concentration are required in the presence of serum proteins. Serum proteins you can think of as feces. They both contain protein that protect the virus. So if you've got a dirty environment, you've got to jack your concentrations up, jack up your contact times to get a good kill. And if you look at lower concentrations, so these would be less than what we normally use, they were ineffective against canine coronavirus, which is very similar to PEDv, even after 3 days of contact time. So concentration is critical. However, if you increase the temperature that you apply those concentrations at, all of a sudden they start to work a lot better. So that means apply your disinfectants in a heated room, in a heated shed if it's a trailer, and they'll work a lot better. Additionally, upping the concentration will work as well. If we look at Quaternary Ammoniums, the other component of a lot of our disinfectants, 5 minutes of contact time were both effective at reducing infectivity of TGE. And these concentrations are real similar to what we're going to be using. This is pretty close to a 1 to 128 dilution, and this is pretty close to a 1 to 256 dilution. So they're effective at that concentration. However, again, the presence of feces is going to significantly decrease their effectiveness. So again, you're going to need to either increase concentrations or increase contact times. So again, these are the concentrations we're using today. They work if everything's really clean. If you're working at a dirty environment, you should probably up your concentrations. If we look at temperature, TGE is going to require an hour at 54 degrees C. 54 degrees C is going to be about 130 degrees Fahrenheit to be inactivated. And if you go below that, it takes multiple hours to days. However, if you bump the temperature up just a little bit to above 60, so if you look at 65 degrees C, and that's going to be right around 150 degrees plus Fahrenheit, they're much more effective and you get a good kill in 5 minutes. If you bump it up even more, it happens even faster. So the more heat, the better, and there really is a critical temperature. Again, at cool temperatures, coronaviruses are going to be stable for days to weeks. And the effect of heat on the virus and activation was also reduced in the presence of feces. So if you've got a dirty trailer that you haven't washed well, you're going to need to either increase your times of heating or the temperatures at which you're heating those trailers. Again, this is true of disinfectants. There's kind of a theme here. If feces is present, nothing works quite as well. So I'll jump quick into some work I did at Iowa State to look at some of these properties specifically with PED. So I'll summarize 4 studies we did with PED where we wanted to evaluate the effectiveness of some protocols in the presence of feces because it decreases the efficacy of all of these practices so drastically, and we know a lot of times folks don't have times to wash out their finishing trailers. So what can we do in the presence of this feces to inactivate PED? And then finally, the 4th study actually did look at a real nice, complete wash, disinfect, and heat protocol to see what's capable, what do we need to do when we're doing things right. In all these studies, we started with PED-positive feces, and then we applied whatever the conditions were we were evaluating, disinfectant or heat, recollected that feces after the treatment, and put it into live pigs to see if they got infected. That's really important. Instead of just looking at PCRs on the feces to see if there's virus there, because that doesn't tell you if it's infective or not. So it's really important that you actually do a bioassay and put it into a pig. So in the first study, the object of this study was to look at a range of time and temperatures that are consistent with our trailer bakers today in the absence of washing. So right here, 63 degrees C would be just shy of what we would normally like to hit today for PERS, which would be about 150. And then we cranked it up a little bit higher as well. And then we also looked at some lower temperatures for increased amount of time. Study 2 evaluated Stalosan F disinfectant powder. Most of you probably aren't real familiar with this product. It's used more in Europe and Canada, but it is a product that was being used, blown into trailers to serve as a disinfectant after returning to Canada from after visiting U.S. buying stations. So we wanted to evaluate this and see, does it really work? Should we? Is there something here? Because this is a very easy to use product. You blow it in very rapidly to a trailer, and you can be done in a matter of minutes. Study 3 looked at Accel liquid foaming disinfectant. So this is a hydrogen peroxide disinfectant used a lot in human hospitals to disinfect surfaces. The advantage of this one is it's supposed to work better in the presence of organic matter, so that we thought maybe there's some promising aspects there. Additionally, it's supposed to have enhanced contact due to some other ingredients that are present in the product. In this study, we looked at both light and heavy fecal loads, so doing a real good job getting that trailer scraped out, or maybe not doing such a great job, and then 2 different concentrations as well. In the 4th study, this was the evaluation of really a good wash, disinfection, and heat protocol. What you really should do in your trailers if you can in any way. So in all these steps, we had wash and then 10 minutes with Synergize, which is a very commonly used disinfectant in trailers. And then different levels of heat applied to them. And then additionally, we looked at what happens if you just wash and disinfect alone. Is that going to be effective without the heating step? So in all these studies, we took PED positive feces from infected pigs and then placed it on some aluminum trays that were made to replicate the environment in a trailer, so 1/8-inch aluminum trays. Each tray was an experimental unit, and we repeated each study treatment group 4 times per study. We used 5 or 10 milliliters of feces, depending on if it was a high fecal load study or a low fecal load study. And then spread it in a thin layer, so you can see this is kind of what it looked like when we spread it out. The idea here is we're replicating what's the inside of a trailer going to look like if we don't wash it, but we at least scrape out the wood chips and the majority of the feces, something that we could accomplish in a few minutes without specialized facilities. At that point, we just applied the disinfectant right to this tray, or if there was a wash step involved, we washed, then applied the disinfectant. Or in the case of the temperature-only study, the trays were placed in a high-temperature incubator, and temperatures of every tray were monitored. And once we hit our target temperature, they were held at that temperature for the designated amount of time, and then removed. And following every treatment, 10 milliliters of saline was placed on the tray. We resuspended what was left of the feces, pulled it up into a syringe, and then took that material and actually placed it directly in the stomach of a naive pig. Placed a rubber catheter into their stomach and injected about 10 to 20 milliliters of solution into their stomach. So the idea being if there's any virus there, these pigs are going to get sick, right? Pigs were then placed in individual housing. So these pigs are on a raised deck with barricade between them. And then for each treatment group, they're put in different rooms, so there was no chance of cross-contamination, and monitored for 1 week. We also had a transmission control group where we took 3 pigs and 1 positive pig to see if the virus would move around between the groups, because that would make it a little more difficult for us to really make some good recommendations from this data. Monitored these pigs for a week and sampled them on day 3 and 7 to see if they had become positive for PED virus. And so this is just a quick summary of what we found. In the first study, the time and temperature study, you can see here, these are the different groups, and in the center, this is a CT value, which is a lower means more virus present, and anything greater than 35 or 40 is negative. So positive samples, and then you can see following heating, if you look at PCR alone, we still have got positive samples. If you look at the actual bioassay results that correspond to those trays, you can see that 2 of the groups actually did not become infected. That would be the highest temperature group, so 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes, and just room temperature for 1 week. And these trays, they dried out quite a bit. So if we were looking at a humid environment where maybe the feces didn't dry out quite as bad, these results may not be repeated in the real world. You can also see varying levels of positive and negative in the intermediate groups. If we look at the results of the Stalosan group, you can see our PCR results say that there's still virus on those trays. And if you look at the bioassay results, what actually happened to the pigs, 100% of them became affected. So not a very effective disinfectant in our mind in this situation. The third study, looking at the Accel in the presence of organic matter. Again, you've got your treatment group down here, and this is amount of virus or feces, and then concentration. And we started positive, and you can actually see the majority of these swabs actually went negative on PCR, which was different than our other studies. If you look at the bioassay results, every single group was 100% effective at inactivating the virus to the point of preventing infection in these pigs. So 1 to 16 and 1 to 32, that would be a very high concentration and a kind of an intermediate concentration for Accel, and both at higher and lower fecal loads. So, you know, some good information as far as, you know, using that in situations where maybe we can't get 100% of the fecal matter out of an environment. And then our final study, where we looked at, you know, really a nice complete trailer wash and disinfection protocol. Again, we started with positive feces, and you can see some went negative, some certainly had a decrease in PCR results, but that's a little bit all over the place. But then when you actually look at the bioassay results, every single group was 100% effective at eliminating the virus. So this means a nice wash and following your disinfection steps properly and adding a heating step is effective at eliminating PEDv from your trailers. Additionally, down here, the steps with no heating step, they were also effective. So to kind of conclude from those studies, if we look at time and temperature, only 2 combinations were 100% effective, and I think we really only want to put any faith in anything that was 100% effective, right? So that was the highest temperature groups, 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. So what I would tell you guys is if you've got a trailer baker or if you work with a trailer baker, have them increase their baking temperatures to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes if you have, you know, suspect problems with PD or if it's in your area. And that's probably everyone. It's kind of everywhere right now. Additionally, lower temperature, room temperature for a week was effective, but I really want to caution people. I'm not advocating that you should just let your trailers rest for a week and that won't activate the virus. This is going to be really dependent on a lot of different factors, whether it's raining, what the temperature is outside, what the relative humidity is, things like that. So I wouldn't use that as an effective means of eliminating PEDv from your trailers. Stalosan F was ineffective. Pretty quick summary there. And Accel appears to be effective at inactivating PEDv in the presence of feces. So this may have applications in situations where washing isn't possible or practical. So those trailers that are coming back from your market just dropped off some finishing hogs and they got to go pick up more and you don't have time to wash or there's no washing facility in your area, you may be able to scrape it out and apply a product like Accel at a high concentration and perhaps decrease your risk of bringing something like PEDv back to the farm. Additionally, a wider range of TAD, thermal-assisted drying and decontamination, or trailer baking configurations, were found to be effective following wash and disinfection with Synergize. So while we have to hit those really high temperatures to inactivate PEDv, if we add in a wash and disinfection step, we've got a lot more leeway when it comes to temperature. Additionally, Synergize and wash alone were also effective. So if you're getting the trailers cleaned and you're putting it on at the appropriate concentration, we should be okay. This, I think, really underscores the importance of good washing in all of your facilities. It's so important to get everything clean and remove the organic material before you disinfect. I'd also like to point out, I do not think this means a heating step should be skipped if you can accomplish it. Because this was a small scale, it was a plate, it was not nearly as complicated as a hog trailer. It was much easier to clean than a hog trailer. I didn't have to, stoop down while I was power washing it. I didn't have latches and doors I had to get behind. I didn't have holes. I didn't have channels. So it probably underestimates the risk a little bit. So if you've got a trailer and even if you're doing a good job washing and disinfecting it, there's probably going to be a small amount of fecal matter left. So you really should try to target those higher temperatures and add a heating step if you can. And then finally, I'd just like to point out environmental swabs in all these studies could not differentiate between infectious and non-infectious PEDv. They'd go positive, and then you'd have, they'd show the presence of virus, and then you'd have pigs that wouldn't get infected. Additionally, if you look at other research that's been done on the minimum infectious dose of PEDv, they've shown that it takes such a small amount that it will register as PCR negative and still be sufficient to infect a pig. So that tells me that a negative may not be a negative, a positive may not be a positive. So maybe when it comes to environmental sampling, we shouldn't place a whole lot of trust in it. There may be some places where we can use it, but it's not everything. You should really put all of your trust in making sure you do a good job with your wash, disinfection, and heating steps. So kind of in conclusion of everything, there's a number of temperature and time combinations that are effective at inactivating coronaviruses in general, and PED in particular. Disinfectants that we commonly use in the swine industry are effective at disinfecting and eliminating PEDv. However, there are a lot of factors that can decrease the efficacy of both of these, and those factors are present in our hog environments quite a bit. So we're talking about the presence of feces. Obviously, there's feces in all of these environments that we're trying to clean. Reduced temperatures will decrease the effectiveness of disinfectants. You know, in Iowa, we've got to wash and disinfect trailers in cold environments a large part of the year. That's going to decrease the efficacy of that disinfectant. So keep those things in consideration when you're washing and disinfecting. So an effective livestock trailer decontamination process should capitalize on the positive aspects of these and try to eliminate as many of these negative aspects as possible. So remove all organic material first via high pressure washing. That will decrease the fecal load, which is going to increase the effectiveness of your next steps. Utilize an appropriate concentration of a disinfectant and do it in a warm environment. So if it's winter and you're washing your trailers, do it in a shed where you can increase the ambient temperature. If you're washing out farrowing rooms or gestation rooms, turn the heat up a little bit while you got the animals out of there, and that increased temperature will make that disinfectant work better. And then finally, following disinfection, trailers should be heated to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes, and this will inactivate any virus that was missed through the washing and disinfection steps. The good news is these recommendations are pretty consistent with today's best practices when it comes to trailer decontamination for PRRS virus and other pathogens. So that's great news for you guys. This is something that you can implement right away. You don't have to build new facilities. You don't have to adapt new technologies. You just have to adapt the ones that already exist in our swine industry and make sure that we increase our temperatures a little bit. And then also you should consider the increased risk due to PEDv-laden feces. So, you know, these are similar to PRRS, and so maybe getting a little sloppy on the washing and disinfection might work for PRRS, but we're talking about PED, and it's present in high numbers in the feces. So if you get a little bit sloppy, it's probably going to hurt you worse than it would with PRRS. And it also has an incredibly small infectious dose. So any small mistake just gets magnified. And if you do those things, you should be in pretty good shape as far as cleaning up PEDv. I'd like to thank National Pork Board, as well as these other organizations that really made this research possible and is able to do this stuff and get it out to the swine industry. It's made a big difference, I think, for a lot of folks already, and so big thanks to them as well. And I don't know how long I went. I don't know if we have time for questions.
We sure do. We have time for several questions, so
deal.
We'll open it up to the audience right now, if we have one.
Yes.
What about vaccines?
So vaccines can play an important role. If you look at, we've got 2 vaccines on the market right now, and if you look at the way they're labeled to be used in herds that have already experienced an outbreak to boost immunity. So what's really best is, now I should rephrase that, because what's really best is not to get an infected herd. So vaccine alone probably isn't going to give you very robust immunity. It may help some. But where the vaccines really work well is in herds that have already experienced an outbreak and done good feedback. You can then put in the vaccines to booster that natural immunity. And that's going to play into the increasing immunity and protecting those piglets and giving them the best chance possible in an environment where we know there's probably going to be some virus for a period of time. So yeah, vaccines absolutely have a role to play.
So ongoing, we haven't had a break, but ongoing a herd, just because they've had it, you stop their chances. That's what you've been saying all along here. Just because you had it doesn't mean you can't.
Re-break? Yeah, absolutely. Especially if our sow farms, we're bringing in replacement gilts all the time to replace our old sows. Anytime you bring in a replacement gilt, you're now introducing naive animals into that herd, and they're absolutely as susceptible as the rest of that herd was on day one prior to the break. And so I think some folks will use vaccine on those animals. It's not exactly how the vaccine's been designed to be used, so I wouldn't expect it to be a miracle worker. But it may help in some ways.
I appreciate your time. Any preference on the vaccines you're willing to?
No, I think they're both, pretty good vaccines. I would just say, work with your herd veterinarian as far as picking out the one that works best for your herd. Yes, sir, in the back.
When you talk about washing them, are you washing them with hot water, cold water, and did you look between the two?
So we did not compare between the two. In the studies, we used cold water. We also used a detergent with the wash. So I may have breezed over that and not mentioned that. So we did use a detergent with the wash, which is always better. So when it comes to washing, the important thing, hot water is not going to really kill the virus effectively. So don't think about I need to use the hot water to kill the virus. But what it's going to do is it's going to make your cleaning more effective. So the important thing is to get a good wash done. If you can use heated water, that's going to increase your your chances of doing a good job cleaning. If you can use detergent, that's going to make the cleaning go smoother. So anything you can add to that washing to make it go better, like hot water or detergent, would be great, but not absolutely necessary if you can do a good job otherwise. Yes, sir.
How many strains have been discovered so far?
I think 2. Is there 3 now?
3 now.
We're up to 3 now. Yeah. All these principles, though, that we've talked about today are the same regardless of what strain you've got. Some strains seem to be more pathogenic than others. Maybe they spread faster, a little bit higher mortality. But really, you don't want any strain. And once you've got it, you want to eliminate it. And so all these principles that we talked about today are going to work the same no matter what the strain is. And that being said, they're going to work on other enteric pathogens as well. So you'll notice if you do these things well, you'll not only get rid of PD, but your rotavirus will clean up, your E. coli scours will clean up. You really won't have much in the way of scours in your farrowing rooms at all. Yep. Yes?
If you have one strain, does that mean that you're going to be immune to just that strain the next time, or are they similar enough that the immunity?
Sure. That's a really good question. That's a little bit out of my wheelhouse as far as expertise go, but I would say probably not perfect cross protection. So the place where those strains vary is on a protein on the outside of the virus that's really important for that virus getting in to the cell, and it's also really important for how the immune system recognizes that virus. And so since that's where the change is happening, it's really likely that seeing one virus isn't going to be recognized as the same by the immune system between strains. So I would expect to not have great cross protection between strains. And I think anecdotally, that's what you hear out in the field. But I'm not real familiar with any clinical research. I'm sure some's been done, but I'm not real familiar with it.
There is a study set about the ongoing versus the not so pathogenic versus the pathogenic strain, and basically what Dr. Thomas is saying is that there may be a slight reduction in mortality, but the animals still become infected, still have clinical signs and show disease. So that is a study that's been done by Pork Board. There's one more question.
Yes.
You've been focusing on the disease being transferred through dirt and feces. Can it also get transferred through semen?
So I don't think there's any evidence right now to suggest that it would be shed into semen in the same way that PERS is shed into semen. Two very different viruses. The tropisms for the tissues that they're going to replicate in are very different. So as far as an infected animal shedding it into the semen, I think that's highly unlikely. However, those doses of semen are coming from a facility. If there's animals that are infected with PEDv, it's coming from a facility that has PEDv on it. And so then what you really want to look at is, the potential for bringing it in as that semen dose being a fomite. So I don't want any supplies coming from a site with PEDv on it going into my sow farms, whether it's semen or it's, any other supply that I'm bringing in. So, I don't think it's getting into the semen itself, but I would worry about the materials that the semen's being packaged in.
I think we've got one more question.
Yes, sir.
I apologize if I missed it. Which strain did you use in your studies?
So it was the original introduction strain, and that would be what folks would think of as the more pathogenic strain, and it would also be the strain that the vaccines are based off.
And what were your thoughts on
on feed as a risk for. I think there's been some instances where it's been pretty well documented that it's feed, but I certainly don't think it's always or even most of the time feed. There's a lot of other things coming onto the farm besides feed. Employees that, drive to gas stations, and other people go to those gas stations, and trucks coming in and off the farm, supplies coming into the farm, animals that might act as a mechanical means of moving it around, tracking it from farm to farm. I mean, there's a lot of variables. Feed has been, probably implicated in a few cases, but I don't think it's the major case or the major cause today. Yes, sir.
You alluded to it briefly, but the other strains then, could you tell a difference when you were observing a pig whether or not you thought it was the original strain versus the other ones? Is there any?
So I actually only have clinical experience with the first strain. I haven't seen the second one on any of the farms that I work with, and I haven't done any research with it. From what I've heard, it's the same clinical signs. I wouldn't say there's like more or less diarrhea, but maybe the percentage or the prevalence of animals affected is lower, slightly lower, but still real bad. And